Wow. Okay. I choked on the word hey. That's a hell of a start right there. How's everybody doing? Hope you're doing well out there. This is the Friday Q&A live stream. However, I'm mixing it up. I'm going to be showing some video, and the beginning will not just be for members only. It'll be for a little bit of everybody. But if you can let me know on especially on locals if everything looks and sounds all right. We had some issues last week, and I want to make sure we're not dealing with those again this week. So let me know how everything looks over there on locals. And yeah, hello to everybody. I wanted to show you these clips because to me this clarifies everything that our U.S. government is. It's an interview with Khanna. Two of my friends, Aaron Mate and Katie Halper, talked to him. And Khanna is essentially one of the most so-called progressive Congress people in all of Congress. This is about as progressive as you can find in Congress. And his, if you want to be generous, you could say misunderstanding of American foreign policy. But if you wanted to be less generous, you could say, he's straight up lying on behalf of the U.S. empire. I actually, for some reason, believe that he is genuinely uninformed on some of these things. And now I do think that very well could be a choice. As you will see in the clips, Aaron Mate presents him with certain facts that Khanna claims to not know or have a different opinion on or whatever. And I'm sure Khanna did not go home and then investigate if he legitimately didn't know those things. I don't think he went home and read up on them to try and investigate. I think that he very much it's willful ignorance. And again, that's kind of being generous to say it's willful ignorance as opposed to just lying for the empire. Anyway, and my point is not that just Democrats are bad. My point is this is about as progressive as you get in Congress. So this is an indictment of the entire Congress, because this is the most progressive. You will that's how sad things are. Anyway, for those of you who are watching on a platform other than Locals, which is also leecamp.net, if you type in leecamp.net, it'll take you there. If you're watching on a different platform, then in a few minutes, this will become members only at leecamp.net. But we'll get to that. We'll do that in a bit. We'll start out like this. I also will be answering your questions over at leecamp.net as well during this hour. So, all right, here's Aaron. And I'm going to jump right in, and I'm going to play it on a 1.2 speed or something, so we don't have to sit through all the ums and ahs at regular speed. Obviously, if you can't hear anything, let me know.
But why not lift these sanctions permanently when we know that sanctions just hurt civilians? And what?
By the way, he's talking about the sanctions on Syria. Obviously, the U.S. has sanctions on many countries, but at the moment, he's speaking about Syria.
Gives us the right to impose sanctions that take away food and medicine from children, whether it's in Syria or anywhere else. And would you specifically be willing to revisit your support for sanctions on Syria?
I've supported sanctions on a regime that has committed gross human rights violations, that has really led to the expulsion of millions of their own citizens, that has committed human rights abuses against children, and engaged in killing of their own civilians.
Now, this is an example of something Khanna does know. He knows full well that we have engaged in killing of their civilians as well. Millions of their civilians, 90% of Syria are below the poverty line. People die every day in Syria because they're not getting medicine and stuff. So when he says he supports sanctions on the regime, these sanctions don't just hit the regime. And he knows that. I mean, he's in this part of it, he's being intentionally dumb.
I believe there has to be exceptions for food and medicine and humanitarian exceptions. And I would want to make sure that there was humanitarian exceptions to get relief for the earthquake, which in my understanding, the administration has done.
So Now, I don't know whether, again, I don't know how dumb he actually is, but when he says there needs to be exceptions to get medicine and things like that in to help people, well, that's not what sanctions do. That's not the way we use sanctions. And yes, there are some rare examples where we legitimately just sanctioned the bank account of one, ruling elite, but that's not what we're talking about here, and is generally not what we're talking about with the United States. Uh, the sanctions on Syria, he's saying there should be exceptions to get medicine in, and no, that's what the sanctions do: is stop medicine from getting in. They stop people from having things that would allow people to survive, such as electricity, gas, food. So when he says there needs to be exceptions, the exceptions he's listing is actually all of the sanctions. Like, his view of what these exceptions should be would be getting rid of all of the sanctions. So now, is he so dumb as to think that our sanctions just hit the Assad regime, but then occasionally we have to let in some medicine? I would find that hard to believe. But this idea that these sanctions, there needs to be exceptions for human rights reasons. No, that's what sanctions do: is harm human rights. They harm humanity, and they harm the poor and the elderly and the infirmed and the babies first. That's who dies first. That's who gets sick and harmed first, and most extremely is going to be those weakest. So the idea that, oh, well, we'll have some exceptions for human rights is just breathtaking, either lies or ignorance. You can take your pick.
But I support sanctions on a regime that I think has been quite brutal over the last decades, frankly. I mean, even Assad's father was brutal in the expulsions that he had from Syria.
Now, something that Aaron does not bring up, although many of you probably know, is, and Aaron does a good job of pushing back. I'm not denying that, but something he doesn't bring up is, of course, that's not what the U.S. does, right? Is have sanctions on every brutal regime. In fact, the U.S. very much loves a lot of brutal regimes, like Saudi Arabia or Brazil under Bolsonaro. You could go down a long, long list. We even love some of these brutal regimes until we turn on them, like Saddam Hussein, which we were partnered with until we didn't anymore, or Gaddafi, who we partnered with until we didn't anymore, and then had him, arranged for him to be bayoneted in the streets. So the idea that the U.S. just has sanctions on brutal regimes, and every time there's a brutal regime, we go down the list and sanction them, is laughable. Extremely laughable. Just breathtaking, either willful ignorance or straight up lying because he knows what you need to say in order to be in U.S. Congress.
Okay, two questions then. You're not to get into a debate about the Syrian war, but you're aware that the U.S. spent billions of dollars funding militias arming militias inside Syria, which helped fuel a catastrophic dirty war. I mean, you're aware of that fact that the U.S. spent billions of dollars fighting a regime change war in Syria, right?
Well, I put the blame on Assad. I mean, I think, and Assad is the one who was committing atrocities for his own people.
I love the U.S. spent billions of dollars facilitating a war within Syria that has killed millions, if you include dying from destroyed infrastructure, etc. But all the blame's on Assad, right? It's all on Assad. There's none on the U.S. for funding and arming. And Aaron does mention this, funding and arming Al-Qaeda. That no blame goes on the U.S. Never. Just Assad. Just Assad.
In some cases, the forced expulsion. In other cases, violence against his own people. Now, I agree that the United States went in and was trying to fight ISIS, was trying to fight terrorism.
You're aware, Congressman, that Jake Sullivan wrote to Hillary Clinton privately, this according to WikiLeaks, that Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria.
By the way, Aaron phrased that slightly incorrectly. It's not according to WikiLeaks. It was revealed by WikiLeaks. It is according to Jake Sullivan and Hillary Clinton. Nothing WikiLeaks has ever printed has been by WikiLeaks. It's all by the actual people, and nothing has ever been proven fake. So when he says according to WikiLeaks, he means published by WikiLeaks. But no, this is according to Jake Sullivan and Hillary Clinton.
Okay, so we weren't fighting terrorism, Sierra. We actually were arming an insurgency that was dominated by Al-Qaeda. And that was admitted not just by Jake Sullivan, but also by the Defense Intelligence Agency. So what I'm saying is, let's even put that aside.
Now, this is something Aaron regularly does, which I respect. The reason he does it is to not have these people storm out of the interview, and to also probably have he's trying to have a certain level of respectful back and forth, which I don't think I would be able to do. So that they can continue to get interviews like Ro Khanna, which, those type of people don't agree to be on my shows. So, but he basically schooled him and then said, let's put Syria aside. Now that I've set all of your bullshit on fire, let's just put that aside. Let's just stop talking about it. Let's move on. But Aaron's great at that.
These sanctions do not hurt the government. Bashar al-Assad and his friends are doing fine. These sanctions hurt civilians, as the UN Special Rapporteur has recognized. As James Jeffrey, the former top envoy under Trump, said about U.S. sanctions, they said that they've crushed Syria's economy. So given that our sanctions are crushing Syria's economy, how can we say they're against the government when you crush an economy, it's the civilians who get hurt? So accordingly, why not revisit that?
Well, what I'm open to is looking at humanitarian food, medicine, relief.
Now that's a straight up dodge. That's just a straight up. We're crushing the people of Syria. Why not? And Aaron even gave him an out by saying, like, why not revisit that? And he could have said, if he had the slightest like moral core at all, Ro Khanna would have said, I'd like to revisit that. But instead, no, I'm going to shift this conversation to the exceptions from these gut-wrenching sanctions that have put 90% of Syrians under the poverty line. These sanctions are so clearly on all Syrians and destroying the lives of all Syrians. I mean, it's just pathetic. And this is the most progressive, one of the most progressive people in Congress.
In cases where sanctions shouldn't be hurting the people. But I believe sanctions are appropriate when you have criminal action, gross human rights violations by a regime like Assad. Now, I think that the United States has to be prudent in not giving people false hope when saying that somehow we're going to effectuate regime change when we're not willing to go and engage in a bloody war there.
That's the real problem that America's been involved in. False hope. If there's something that the United States needs to really tamp down on, it's false hope. Not the gut-wrenching sanctions or bombs or destroying of entire nations. It's just the false hope. If we could just crank the false hope down 3 notches, then we would no longer be an imperial state. Everything be fine.
But the guilt, the moral guilt is clearly, in my view, with Assad.
Can I just ask a question?
See, now I put the question to you all. When he says all of the moral guilt, none of the fact that we have put 90% of Syrians under the poverty line and countless have been killed, the fact that we still hold 10% of Syria, something like 10% of Syria, and much of it is their oil fields. All of that's on Assad. Is that how you guys see it as well? All of that's on Assad?
Question though. So is this for you then, sanctions are like a moral expression, or do they actually have an impact that you think is a net positive for the people of Syria or whichever country we're talking about?
I think that there's a need to have repercussions when people commit gross human rights violations.
And that's another dodge, because she said, is there a net positive for the people of Syria? Of course, the answer is fucking no. Absolutely not. There's a net positive. How about a net positive for the Syrians who have already died from our sanctions? Do you think they're feeling they really gained a lot from our sanctions? So the answer is absolutely no. There is no net positive for Syrians right now from our sanctions. Only a net negative. Only harm. And yet he's dodging it to say, oh, there needs to be ramifications for bad people. And it's like, well, the ramifications for when the U.S. destroys lives, or there are ramifications for, and it's a dodge. It's like, it's something we can all agree with, right? Everyone thinks, oh, there should be ramifications for bad people. Oh, but only the bad people that have gone outside the petrodollar that the U.S. wants to create a failed state in their nation. Those are the only bad people that there should be ramifications for.
Violations and abuse to deter that. I mean, there has to be some consequence to leaders, and they're not going to be tried at the International Criminal Court because they're in charge, and having sanctions is one way to do that. Just like
Ro Khanna doesn't mention that. He says, oh, they're not going to be charged at the International Criminal Court. We can't do that to them. He doesn't mention that the U.S. is one of the few countries that didn't sign on to the International Criminal Court because we were afraid our people would be tried at the ICC. And in fact, we put a bill through Congress, this is before Ro Khanna was there, that we would invade The Hague if they ever prosecuted one of our people. So I love how the U.S. now, so much of the U.S. is, the mainstream media, the American ruling elite. They love, right now they're pointing to the ICC and saying, ICC is going to get Putin. Yay, ICC, International Criminal Court. We didn't sign on to it. And in fact, we said we would fucking invade them if they ever prosecuted one of our war criminals. But now they're all big fans of the ICC.
I support sanctions on Putin. Just like I support sanctions on the officials who were responsible for the Uyghurs. Just like I've supported sanctions.
I got to throw in the Uyghur propaganda there. The completely debunked, hilariously fake bullshit about a Uyghur. They don't even call it a genocide because they can't. Even their propaganda can't support that. So they call it a cultural genocide, which there's fucking no evidence of. But he had to throw that in there because I assume that Ro Khanna, like all of our neoliberals, get all of their information from, AP and Reuters, and that's it. So if Reuters says something, that's the truth. That's it. End of story.
In other cases where there are gross human rights violations, but I have said that there always needs to be, those sanctions need to be targeted, and there needs to be exceptions for civilians, and where civilians are really being
exceptions for civilians. We've destroyed all of Syria. How many fucking civilians is that? It's all civilians. Who does he really think Assad is the one suffering from our sanctions? Does he think Assad doesn't have nice dinners every evening? It's not Assad that's suffering from these sanctions. It is every goddamn Syrian person. Like that is poor, which is 90% of the country. Yeah, we need exceptions for civilians, and yeah, well then end the goddamn sanctions.
Being affected with food and medicine and some of the basics.
Would you support sanctions on the U.S. for occupying 1/3 of Syria and stealing its oil and wheat?
I love that question. That's an excellent question.
As is U.S. policy, Trump admitted that we're in Syria to steal the oil, or imposing sanctions on the U.S. for arming militias inside Syria that committed atrocities.
No, I don't, because I don't think that the United States' role there was imperial. I think that the United States was there in trying to defend against ISIS. Now, whether there were alliances with Al-Qaeda,
Did you hear the key line, though? To me, this sums up all of it. The U.S. is not in Syria for imperial reasons. Our aims are not imperial in Syria. Now, do you think he believes that? Do you think Ro Khanna believes that there aren't imperial aims in why we've created very close to a failed state in Syria? Of course there are. There are multiple imperial aims, one of which is that Syria was one of the larger countries that's outside the petrodollar, outside of the international settlement bank, outside of our ability to crush them via petrodollar. And same with Iraq, same with Iran, who we haven't been able to. They're too large and too powerful for us to do what we've done with other countries, but we're at their throats. Same with Libya. And so all of those aims were imperial. Now, if it just had to do with we didn't like how Assad was treating his people, then go down the long list of countries that treat their people shitty and how we don't care at all as long as they align with our interests, as long as their shitty leader is doing what the United States wants. We don't care if they treat their people shitty. I mean, come on. Again, just want to reiterate, most progressive, one of the most progressive people in Congress. This is what progressivism looks like in a ideological failed state like the United States, in an ideological catastrophe that is the U.S. government. This is what a progressive looks. This is the most you'll get of progressivism.
I don't know. I mean, but the point is that you have two different threats. You have the Al Qaeda threat, you have the ISIS threat. We didn't want a caliphate in Syria. No one.
He claims to not know what's going on here. I don't know. It's like, really? You haven't read anything about how the U.S. funded and armed Al Qaeda offshoots like Al Nusra, straight up terrorists in order to just create chaos in Syria? You didn't never notice any of that? No?
Would support the United States forced, or no one on, I think, on the Democratic side would want the United States to be going and taking oil fields, and I would not support that.
Well, that's what we're doing. Trump admitted that. Dana Stroul, who's a top official in the Pentagon, she's admitted that. And on ISIS, look, the problem with Syria is you can get into these long rabbit holes, and you're not here for
that. Again, Eric, Aaron's like basically like, okay, we've destroyed you. We can move on to the next topic. But this whole I don't know what's going on and whether we're taking the oil. He acts like he doesn't know whether we're taking the oil in Syria. It's like Trump outright said that we continue to hold something like 10% of Syria. And yet that's not an invasion. We haven't invaded Syria. No, none of that.
So basically, that was the U.S. attitude toward ISIS for a very long time. And now the U.S. is barely fighting ISIS at all. It's there, as Trump said, to take the oil. So according to your standards of applying sanctions, why not apply sanctions on the government that is there to take Syria's oil?
Well, first of all, I think the United States under Obama's leadership helped defeat ISIS in getting the terror.
After it watched them grow, yes, sure.
So I think that is a credit to our military there. I mean, whether we watched them grow for too long, I mean, that depends on the facts. I mean, I don't have enough knowledge to know all of the details, but I will.
It's a credit to our military. How many people have died? 6 million have died in the wars on terror in that region. 6 million people, most of them innocent, and this is a credit to our military. Our military's done such a great job over there.
Say that I supported President Obama's efforts to then.
All right, they get into some bullshit about how wonderful Obama was taking on ISIS. That's pathetic. Well, I don't mean for them. I mean for him.
Policy to go appropriate oil fields. It was to defeat ISIS.
Okay.
The policy wasn't to steal the oil. The policy was to defeat ISIS. And that's why we have sanctions that have destroyed 90% of Syrians' lives, is to get ISIS. And man, if those sanctions done a good job getting ISIS. Yep.
You were one of the. We're going to put Syria to the side, and thank you for your answers on that. You were one of the early members of Congress to call for diplomacy inside Ukraine. Well, even before the Congressional Progressive Caucus came out in support of diplomacy, we had that controversy where 24 hours after that letter came out from the Progressive Caucus, which you signed, urging the Biden administration to engage in diplomacy, the letter was withdrawn. You were one of the few to actually stand by the letter. But now we're several months later, and there's still no movement, at least that we can see publicly, on ending this war in Ukraine. Where do you stand on this now? Do you think the Biden administration should be using its considerable leverage in this horrible war to try to end it?
So I'll play his answer in 1 second, but Aaron's mentioning that Ro Khanna was one of the few, and this is what I mean. He's one of the most progressive members of Congress, so-called progressive in the U.S. version of progressive, which is not progressive at all. And he actually was calling for diplomacy in Ukraine pretty much since the beginning. But that's what makes his upcoming answer and ignorance so breathtaking. This is one of the most progressive congresspeople who supports diplomacy. I
believe that Secretary Blinken is having lines of communication open with.
Let me shrink his answer. The U.S., he just said is. He means is having diplomacy. His answer is the U.S. right now is looking for a diplomatic end to the war in Ukraine. Does anybody, again, I want to hear your comments. I want to see your comments in the comment section. Does anybody here believe the U.S. right now is looking for a diplomatic solution in Ukraine and has been for months and months and months. Like, it's so breathtakingly either ignorant or just bullshit. And Blinken right now is working, with Russia to end the war in the proxy war that we did everything to try and create. Yeah, is that true? And here's the thing: there actually, and I've done some coverage of it. There actually are some signs that the U.S. is ready to wind down the war in Ukraine, but that's different than what he's talking about. He's saying the U.S. has been working for months to try and create a diplomatic and peaceful end to the war in Ukraine. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
With Lazarov, I mean, both they met in India briefly. They've communicated recently over the Wall Street Journal prisoner and calling for his release. I don't think China has the moral credibility to be the peacemaker here, given.
Now that's another shift. That's a full-on dodge. Let's move over and insult China a little, because that'll take the heat off me.
That they're still unwilling to condemn Putin's invasion of Ukraine, given that Xi Jinping has described Putin as his closest friend and closest ally.
So he's decided to shift to China, and his main criticism of China seems to be that President Xi called Putin a friend. That's the best he's got.
So, it's going to take some neutral parties to.
Oh, neutral parties. The U.S. Yeah, are we the neutral party that's going to bring about this diplomatic end? The people that funded it, armed it, created it, pushed up on Russia's borders with NATO for years and years, helped create the 2014 coup by funding and arming Nazis. Are we the neutral arbiters of this?
To actually help bring about a just peace that recognizes Ukrainian sovereignty. But I give the president and Secretary Blinken credit in that they have not wanted to escalate the war. They have tried to deconflict it. They have resisted calls to.
Did you catch that? They have not wanted the U.S. empire, Blinken, Biden, etc., have not wanted to escalate the war, have not tried to, they've tried to deconflict it. Is that the word he uses? Could you imagine? So there's two possibilities here. Either he believes the shit he's saying right now, or he doesn't, and he's just flat out lying to you. If he's flat out lying to you, okay, then he's the same as Biden and Blinken and Trump and Trump's advisors and anyone else who lied to you in the top echelons of this government. Or he is so breathtakingly ignorant on this topic that he thinks Blinken and Biden and the Biden administration have not tried to escalate this since the beginning and have tried to deconflict it or something. What? I mean, if he believes that is a level of ignorance that is just, wow. That is a level of ignorance that you could just walk straight into and never get out.
To have any kind of aggression into Russia. And what they want is a just peace, which is that
they've never wanted to have any kind of aggression into Russia. They blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Is that not aggressive enough for you?
Ukraine's sovereignty is protected, and Russia recognizes that.
Have you seen the reports? They're sourced to Naftali Bennett, the former Israeli prime minister, a Turkish foreign minister, and also sources close to Zelensky in the Ukrainian media, that the U.S. and the U.K. basically told Zelensky early on in the war, after he reached a tentative agreement with Russia, that sorry, if you make an agreement, we're not going to back you up with security guarantees. Meaning that the U.S. and U.K. blocked peace and prolonged the war. Have you seen these reports? Are they concerned?
And you guys, if you watch my live stream regularly, I've talked about that since it first came out, that there was a peace deal that was very close to being signed between Russia and Zelensky, and the U.S. via Boris Johnson went running to Ukraine. Boris Johnson literally in his final days as prime minister, sprinting to Ukraine to tell Zelensky that he cannot sign a peace deal. And in fact, after that moment, Zelensky and the Ukraine government have never sat down to even discuss. Since then, I still don't think there's been any discussion. So the U.S. made sure all peace possibilities were over.
you at all? Has there been any effort in Congress to find out what happened there?
I would find those very hard to believe.
just stop and think about that response for a moment. I would find it hard to believe the U.S. wanted the proxy war we created. I would find that would blow my rubber underpants right off. Oh my goodness. Hold on, you're saying the U.S. wanted the conflict in Ukraine that we've been salivating at for years, since before 2014?
I can't speak for what Boris Johnson was doing, but I'll tell you, for the people
He didn't ask you to speak for what Boris Johnson's doing. He gave you the reports that say what Boris Johnson was doing, and he's asking you to speak to how you feel about that. So again, this is another dodge. I don't know what Boris Johnson was thinking.
I've talked to in the United States, foreign policy apparatus and military apparatus, they see our paired challenge to be China, and they see the war actually to be a huge use of our resources, one that is just and needs to happen, but one that is distracting us from real.
Yeah, I mean, yet again, this is so clearly a lie, because it's not just ignorance, because he knows, he's got to know that the reason Ukraine, it's not just about China. Ukraine proxy war actually relates to China. It's being used, and that's the reason the U.S. wanted it, to try and create a rift between Russia and China. They were hoping that they could pressure China into, saying they also would not be speaking or working with Russia because of the invasion of Ukraine. So it very much connects to China. And he's acting like, oh, yeah, the U.S. security apparatus, they're just like, shit, we got to deal with Ukraine, and now we can't focus on war with China. Also, why does he keep pushing for war with China in this interview?
Really focusing on Asia. So I don't think that there would be anyone.
Oh, by the way, I forgot to do this a little earlier. I'm heading over. We're going to complete this. He's got some other insane things he says as well. Complete this at leecamp.net. That will take you to my locals page, leecamp.net, for members only. So I hope you will join me over there. If you're already on locals at leecamp.net, then nothing should change for you. Just give me 1 second. And everybody else, by the way, my new book is out. So I hope you'll grab that, which you get for free if you join up at leecamp.net.